I've tracked these rocks now for more than a month as they wore down inside my tumbler. Plenty of them are still tumbling, but today the first set of rocks is finally complete. Last time, I showed these being loaded up in my vibratory tumbler after they'd finished their third stage of tumbling. After a couple of days in the polish, I add some water. A couple of minutes should be enough to get the polish to loosen up a little bit on the rocks. Then it's time to drain. I transfer the rocks over to a plastic bin, rinse them off, clean the barrel, and then put everything back in with some clean water. I'll repeat this a few times just to make sure the rocks are really clean. Any that have fractures go in this ultrasonic cleaner. It makes a really annoying noise, but it's kind of satisfying to watch as the polish comes flying out of those cracks. Once I'm satisfied that everything is clean, the rocks get dried off and we get to see the final results. There are so many fun rocks in here that it's hard to decide where to start. How about a couple of pieces that both came from this quartz rock here that I cut up? It's mostly a milky quartz that's been stained a deep red by iron. Sometimes it's called hematoid quartz. I put one of the slices and this end piece into my tumbler, and it didn't take too long in the rough grit for both of them to really round out. Last week, you saw them together like this. Now, check out how shiny they are. These simple quartz rocks can hide incredible lines of red and a beautiful mix of frosty quartz with varying transparency. Speaking of transparency, some of these quartz rocks looked like they had great clarity early on in the tumbling process. I thought some of them looked a little bit like icicles. So how'd they finish up? Check out how different these look from different angles. As I turn the rock, those interior lines become more and less visible. This one here is really fun. The clarity of the quartz coupled with the yellow and red staining make a beautiful combination. This one here might be my favorite from the entire batch. I started things off today with stained quartz that came out beautifully, but sometimes the staining isn't so eye-catching. From the beginning, this rock had me confused. I've tumbled a lot of stained quartz rocks, and sometimes the exterior has some brown stains, but usually it's very superficial, and as the rock tumbles and the surface starts to wear away, it reveals more of a veiny pattern of lines. Usually red, maybe an almost purple or a black. And I'm definitely seeing something like that here, but I've never seen a rock where the quartz was so thoroughly stained this sort of brown color. It may not be the prettiest, but I think it's awesome that this rock sits in a weird place of familiar and different. It highlights just how much variety there is out there. At first, I was worried about this rock. Then last week, I was excited about it. The fractures left behind a mosaic of red-stained quartz that looked really cool. So now that the rock's polished, how do I feel about it? Well, it's still pretty cool, especially on this side. Unfortunately, some of those fractured pieces basically came loose, which was my initial concern. Still, I really enjoyed getting to see how the mosaic side turned out. Last week, I noticed that this rock had some really interesting little flecks of something that were eye-catching. Now that it's polished, those flecks really pop. That fleck of material was on the surface, but it turns out there are plenty of them throughout the rock. There are also some areas on the rock where internal fractures really catch the light. This is a rock that normally I wouldn't have treated as a priority to tumble just because it has so many fractures, but I'm glad it made its way through the process. And this one here is pretty similar, but without that extra sparkle. It's hard to decide when a rock like this one is done tumbling because of the fractures. This area here would probably have smoothed out much better if it had another week or two. But when there are so many fractures, you never really know what new issue those extra weeks will uncover. So I moved it on, and I think it came out okay. Some of these smaller rocks have a cool, snowy, sparkling white with strings of red. I found lots of rocks like this in the past here in Virginia, especially in the Lake Fairfax area. This batch had plenty of yellowed quartz as well. I need to think of something to do with all these yellow quartz that I collect and tumble, because by itself, they're kind of ugly, but maybe they'd make a good accent color in a display with some other rocks. I'd meant to polish just quartz pieces in this batch, but this random piece of quartzite also slipped in here. It has some really nice pinks. Blue quartz in this area tends to come in kind of a matrix, which can make it difficult to tumble. You can see that this one does still have a lot of matrix material and that there are fractures in it, but I still think it turned out really nice. I'll have to keep my eyes peeled for more blue in the future. I had figured the spots of purple and yellow on this rock wouldn't take a polish. Typically that material is softer, and so it just kind of leaves lumpy spots. I'm glad I turned out to be wrong though. The purple on this quartz is really pretty. So, which one was your favorite? Be sure to let me know in the comments. And remember, this is just the first round of these rocks. There's plenty more where these came from, so be sure to check back every week for more.